35. Baby. Discovered mother bear was testing new medicine on herself. First, what happened next was touching. The morning mist clung to the ancient pines like whispered secrets, and photographer Ethan Marshall adjusted his camera lens with practiced silence. He had been tracking this particular mother bear and her cub for 3 weeks now, documenting their daily routines in the heart of Yellowstone's most remote wilderness. The forest around him breathed with life, every rustling leaf and distant bird call creating a symphony that had become his constant companion. Ethan had photographed countless wildlife families, but something about this pair felt different, more intimate somehow, as if they carried stories that went deeper than survival instincts. The mother bear, a magnificent creature with chocolate-brown fur that caught the early sunlight like burnished copper, moved with the confident grace of a seasoned survivor. Her cub, barely 6 months old, bounced alongside her with the endless energy that only the very young possess. Ethan watched through his telephoto lens as the little one tumbled over fallen logs, chased butterflies that danced just out of reach, and occasionally stopped to investigate interesting scents with the serious concentration of a tiny scientist. The bond between mother and child was evident in every shared glance, every protective nudge, every moment of play that dissolved into gentle grooming sessions under the dappled forest canopy. But on this particular morning, as golden rays pierced through the towering evergreens, Ethan noticed something that made him pause mid-shot. The mother bear had stopped her usual foraging routine and was looking around with what seemed like nervous energy. Her massive head turned left and right, ears twitching as she listened for sounds that Ethan's human ears couldn't detect. The cub, sensing his mother's change in demeanor, stopped his playful exploration and moved closer to her protective bulk, his small black nose working overtime to understand what had captured her attention. Then, with movements that seemed almost secretive, the mother bear began walking toward a cluster of ancient oak trees that stood like sentinels at the edge of a small clearing. Ethan adjusted his position carefully, mindful not to step on any twigs that might betray his presence. Through his lens, he watched as she approached a hollow log that lay partially concealed beneath a tangle of wild ferns and moss-covered rocks. The way she moved toward it suggested familiarity, as if this wasn't her first visit to this particular spot. What happened next made Ethan's finger pause over the camera's shutter button. The mother bear reached into the hollow with one massive paw and withdrew something that glinted dully in the filtered sunlight. It was a small tin, old and weathered, the kind that might once have held tobacco or small tools. The sight of a human-made object in the paws of a wild bear was unusual enough, but what she did next was even more intriguing. She pried open the tin with careful precision, revealing what appeared to be a dark, paste-like substance that had the consistency of thick honey mixed with herbs. The cub watched from a safe distance, his head tilted in that universal expression of confusion that transcends species. His small ears were perked forward, and his bright eyes tracked every movement his mother made. There was something almost human in his posture, the way he seemed to be trying to understand a ritual that was beyond his young comprehension. Ethan found himself holding his breath, feeling like an intruder witnessing something deeply private and significant. The mother bear dipped one claw into the dark paste and brought it to her mouth, her expression becoming almost meditative as she consumed the strange substance. She ate slowly, deliberately, as if the act required her full concentration. Her eyes remained alert, constantly scanning the area around them, but there was something else in her gaze that Ethan couldn't quite identify. Was it determination, resignation, or perhaps something closer to hope? After consuming what appeared to be a carefully measured amount, the mother bear closed the tin and returned it to its hiding place in the hollow log. She spent several minutes arranging the ferns and debris around the opening, effectively camouflaging the container from casual observation. The thoroughness of her concealment suggested this was a well-practiced routine, something she had done many times before. The cub approached tentatively, his nose working to catch any lingering sense that might explain his mother's behavior. He sniffed at the ground where she had been sitting, then looked up at her with an expression that seemed to ask 1,000 questions. The mother bear responded by gently nuzzling the top of his head, a gesture so tender that Ethan felt his heart tighten with unexpected emotion. There was something profoundly touching about the scene, though he couldn't yet understand why. As they resumed their journey through the forest, Ethan noticed subtle changes in the mother bear's behavior. Her steps seemed slightly less assured, and she paused more frequently to rest. The cub, still full of boundless energy, would run ahead and then circle back to check on her, his concern evident in the way he stayed closer to her side than usual. It was as if the young bear sensed that something was different, even if he couldn't understand what it was. The photographer followed at a respectful distance, his mind racing with questions. What was in that tin? Why did the mother bear seem to be hiding this behavior from her cub? And most puzzling of all, why did she appear to be weakening after consuming what might have been medicine or food? None of it made sense according to any wildlife behavior he had studied or observed in his 15 years of nature photography. Throughout the day, Ethan documented their movements with the dedication of a true naturalist, but his thoughts kept returning to that hollow log and the mysterious tin. He had witnessed countless examples of animal behavior that initially seemed inexplicable, only to later reveal themselves as perfectly logical survival strategies. Bears were known for their intelligence and adaptability, often displaying problem-solving skills that rivaled those of primates. Perhaps this was simply another example of their remarkable ability to use available resources in unexpected ways. As the afternoon wore on, the mother bear's energy seemed to flag even more noticeably. She moved more slowly, took longer rests, and seemed to require more effort to keep up with her naturally energetic cub. The little one, sensing his mother's fatigue, began to moderate his own behavior, staying closer and engaging in less vigorous play. It was heartbreaking to watch the young bear's confusion as he tried to understand why his strong, capable mother was acting so differently. Ethan found himself torn between his role as an objective observer and his growing concern for the welfare of the animals he was documenting. Professional ethics demanded that he not interfere with natural processes, but what if this wasn't natural? What if the mother bear had somehow ingested something harmful? The tin suggested human involvement, and humans had a long history of leaving dangerous substances where wildlife might encounter them. As evening approached and the golden light began to fade into the deeper blues and purples of twilight, the bear family settled into a grove of aspen trees for the night. The mother bear arranged herself in a protective position that would allow her to shield her cub from any potential threats. But even in this defensive posture, she seemed less formidable than usual. The cub curled up against her warm bulk, occasionally lifting his head to study her face with those bright, intelligent eyes that seemed far too knowing for such a young creature. Ethan made his own camp at a safe distance, his mind churning with possibilities and concerns. He had come to the wilderness to capture images of natural beauty and behavior, but instead found himself confronting a mystery that seemed to blur the lines between the wild and the human world. The tin in the hollow log was clearly man-made, but how had it come to be part of a bear's routine? And why did consuming its contents seem to have such a dramatic effect on the mother's energy and behavior? Sleep came fitfully that night. interrupted by dreams of dark forests and mysterious substances, of mother bears who carried secrets too heavy for their cubs to understand. When dawn finally broke through the canopy above his small tent, Ethan was already awake, camera ready, determined to solve the puzzle that had captured his imagination and his heart. The second day began much like the first, with the mother bear leading her cub through their familiar territory in search of food and suitable places to rest. But Ethan noticed that her movements were even more labored than they had been the previous day, and the cub's concern was becoming more pronounced. The young bear stayed closer to his mother's side, occasionally pressing against her leg as if trying to offer comfort or support. Around mid-morning, they returned to the hollow log. Ethan positioned himself carefully, ensuring he had a clear view while remaining completely concealed behind a massive pine trunk. His heart rate increased as he watched the familiar ritual unfold once again. The mother bear retrieved the tin with the same careful precision, opened it with practiced ease, and consumed another measured portion of the dark paste. But this time, Ethan noticed something that made his blood run cold. After consuming the substance, the mother bear swayed slightly on her feet, as if fighting off a wave of dizziness or nausea. She steadied herself against the fallen log, her breathing becoming more labored. The cub immediately moved to her side, pressing his small body against her leg and making soft, whimpering sounds that spoke of deep concern and confusion. The implications hit Ethan like a physical blow. What if the substance in the tin wasn't medicine at all, but poison? What if some misguided human had left a toxic bait that the intelligent mother bear had mistaken for food or medicine? Bears were known to have incredibly sensitive noses and could detect substances at concentrations far below human perception, but that didn't make them immune to deception or accidental poisoning. His photographer's instincts warred with his human compassion as he watched the scene unfold. Every ethical guideline he had ever learned about wildlife photography emphasized the importance of non-interference, of allowing natural processes to proceed without human intervention. But if this wasn't natural, if human negligence or malice was slowly killing this magnificent creature, didn't he have a responsibility to act? The mother bear eventually recovered her equilibrium and carefully concealed the tin once again, but her movements were noticeably slower and less coordinated than they had been even the day before. The cub followed her with obvious worry, occasionally bumping against her gently as if trying to offer support or simply seeking reassurance that she was still there, still strong enough to protect him. As they moved through the forest that day, Ethan found himself studying every aspect of their behavior with new intensity. He noticed how the mother bear would sometimes pause mid-step, as if gathering strength for the next movement. He saw how the cub had begun to take on some of the vigilant behaviors typically associated with adult bears, constantly scanning their surroundings and staying alert for potential threats. It was as if the young bear sensed that his mother's ability to protect them was somehow compromised. The most heartbreaking moments came when the cub would try to initiate their usual games and play sessions. He would bounce and tumble in front of his mother, clearly inviting her to chase him or wrestle as they had done countless times before. But the mother bear, who had always been an enthusiastic participant in these activities, could barely muster the energy to acknowledge his attempts at play. She would touch him gently with her nose or paw, a gesture that seemed to say, "I love you, but I can't." And the cub would settle down beside her with an expression of disappointed acceptance that was almost too painful to witness. By the third day, the pattern had become unmistakable. Each morning brought a return to the hollow log. Each consumption of the mysterious paste brought increased weakness and fatigue, and each evening found the mother bear struggling more visibly with the simple tasks of daily survival. The cub's behavior had evolved from confusion to active concern, and he now rarely strayed more than a few feet from his mother's side. Ethan found himself facing the most difficult ethical dilemma of his professional career. His training and experience told him to document and observe without interference, but his heart was breaking as he watched what appeared to be a slow-motion tragedy unfolding before his lens. The bond between mother and cub was so evident, so touching in its depth and tenderness, that the thought of the young bear losing his protector and guide was almost unbearable. On the fourth morning, as he prepared to follow the bear family once again, Ethan made a decision that would change everything. Instead of simply observing their routine, he would investigate the source of the mysterious tin. If it contained poison, he needed to know where it had come from and whether there were others like it scattered throughout the forest. If it was medicine, he needed to understand why it seemed to be having such a devastating effect on the mother bear's health. The investigation would require him to visit the hollow log when the bears were elsewhere, to examine the tin and its contents more closely, and possibly to trace its origins back to whatever human had placed it there. It meant crossing the line from passive observer to active participant in the story he was documenting. But Ethan could no longer stand by and watch without trying to understand and possibly help. As he packed his equipment that morning, his hands trembled slightly with a mixture of anticipation and dread. He was about to uncover secrets that had been hidden in the depths of the wilderness, secrets that might explain the mysterious behavior he had been witnessing and the slow deterioration of a magnificent wild creature. Whatever he discovered in that hollow log would either confirm his worst fears or reveal a truth he had never imagined, but either way, he knew there was no turning back from the path he had chosen. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Ethan prepared to solve the mystery that had captured his heart and challenged everything he thought he knew about the relationship between humans and the wild creatures who shared their world. The mother bear and her cub had become more than subjects for his camera. They had become a window into questions about sacrifice, love, and the lengths to which a parent will go to protect their child, even in the animal kingdom. Days turned into a week, and Ethan's concern deepened with each passing sunrise. The routine had become as predictable as it was troubling. The secretive journey to the hollow log, the careful consumption of the dark paste, and the increasingly visible toll it was taking on the mother bear's strength and vitality. What had begun as curiosity had transformed into genuine fear for the welfare of this wild family that had somehow captured his heart. The changes in the mother bear were becoming more pronounced with each passing day. Where once she had moved through the forest with the confident power of an apex predator, she now walked with the careful, measured steps of someone fighting against an invisible burden. Her magnificent coat, which had gleamed like burnished copper in the early morning light, seemed to have lost some of its luster. Her eyes, though still alert and watchful, carried a weariness that spoke of an internal struggle Ethan couldn't begin to understand. But it was the cub's response to his mother's deterioration that truly broke Ethan's heart. The young bear had evolved from a carefree bundle of energy into a miniature caregiver, constantly monitoring his mother's condition and adjusting his own behavior to accommodate her limitations. When she needed to rest more frequently, he would settle beside her without complaint, though his small body practically vibrated with suppressed energy. When she moved more slowly, he would walk at her pace instead of bounding ahead, as young bears naturally do. The most touching moments came during their rest periods, when the cub would gently groom his mother's fur with the careful attention of a concerned child. He would use his small tongue to clean areas around her face and ears, occasionally pausing to look into her eyes, as if searching for answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. The mother bear would accept these ministrations with a patience that seemed tinged with sadness, as if she understood her cub's confusion but was powerless to explain what was happening to her. Ethan found himself anthropomorphizing their relationship in ways that went against his scientific training, but the emotional dynamics he was witnessing seemed to transcend species boundaries. The love between mother and child, the concern of the young for the welfare of their parent, the gentle care offered in times of weakness. These were universal themes that spoke to something fundamental about the nature of family bonds, whether human or animal. The mystery of the tin and its contents had become an obsession that colored every aspect of Ethan's daily routine. He would lie awake in his tent at night, staring up at the star-filled sky through the mesh ceiling, trying to piece together the puzzle of what he was witnessing. Every possible explanation he could imagine seemed to have flaws or contradictions that didn't fit with what he was observing. If the paste was medicine, why did it seem to be making the mother bear weaker rather than stronger? If it was food, why was she hiding its consumption from her cub? If it was poison, why did she return to it day after day with such deliberate intent? The behavior didn't match any pattern of accidental ingestion or forced consumption that he could identify from his years of studying wildlife behavior. The most disturbing possibility was that the mother bear was somehow aware that the substance was harmful, but continued to consume it anyway. This would suggest a level of intentional self-harm that seemed inconsistent with the strong survival instincts that had allowed her species to thrive in harsh wilderness environments for thousands of years. Bears were intelligent creatures, capable of complex problem-solving and adaptive behavior, but deliberately poisoning oneself seemed to go against every evolutionary imperative. Yet, as Ethan continued to observe and document their daily routine, he began to notice subtle details that suggested the mother bear's behavior was far from random or accidental. The way she checked and double-checked the area around the hollow log before retrieving the tin spoke of careful planning and awareness of potential risks. The precision with which she measured her consumption of the paste indicated a deliberate dosing strategy rather than random ingestion. Most tellingly, the care with which she concealed the tin after each use suggested she was actively hiding her actions from potential observers, including, perhaps, her own cub. This last observation troubled Ethan more than any other aspect of the mystery. Throughout his years of wildlife photography, he had documented countless examples of animal parents teaching their offspring about food sources, safe behaviors, and survival strategies. The sharing of knowledge between generations was a fundamental aspect of how wild creatures adapted to their environments and passed on successful survival techniques. For a mother bear to deliberately hide a food source or medicine from her cub went against every natural teaching instinct he had ever observed. The cub's growing confusion and concern became more evident with each passing day. The young bear would often sit and stare at his mother with an expression that seemed almost human in its perplexity. He would approach the hollow log area with obvious curiosity, sniffing around the concealed tin's location with the intense focus of an investigator trying to solve a puzzle. But whenever his mother noticed his interest in that particular area, she would gently but firmly redirect his attention elsewhere, leading him away to other activities or locations. These moments of redirection were handled with such subtle skill that Ethan might have missed them if he hadn't been watching so intently. The mother bear never used force or aggression to keep her cub away from the hollow log. Instead, she employed the gentle guidance techniques that parent animals use to teach boundaries and safety. She would simply place herself between the cub and the area of interest, then initiate some other activity that would capture his attention and lead him away from the forbidden zone. The sophistication of this behavior suggested a level of intentionality that made Ethan's head spin with possibilities. The mother bear wasn't just hiding her consumption of the mysterious paste. She was actively managing her cub's knowledge and access to whatever was in that tin. This implied that she understood the substance well enough to make complex decisions about who should and shouldn't be exposed to it, which in turn suggested that her consumption of it was part of a larger strategy rather than simple accident or compulsion. As the days passed and the mother bear's condition continued to deteriorate, Ethan found himself facing an internal crisis that challenged every aspect of his professional identity. The non-interference principle that governed ethical wildlife photography was clear and unambiguous. Observe and document, but do not intervene in natural processes. Human interference in wildlife behavior, no matter how well-intentioned, often led to unintended consequences that could be far worse than the original problem. But what if this wasn't a natural process? What if human actions had already interfered with the natural order, and his continued non-intervention was actually perpetuating an artificial and harmful situation? The presence of the man-made tin suggested that humans were already part of this story, which might change the ethical calculus of whether further human involvement was justified or even necessary. The question that haunted Ethan most was whether his inaction might result in the death of the mother bear, leaving her cub orphaned and vulnerable in the harsh wilderness. Young bears typically stayed with their mothers for 2 to 3 years, learning essential survival skills and gradually developing the knowledge and strength needed for independent life. A 6-month-old cub separated from its mother would face almost insurmountable challenges, with survival rates that were depressingly low even under the best circumstances. Yet, even as these concerns weighed on his mind, Ethan continued to document every aspect of the unfolding drama with the thoroughness of a dedicated naturalist. His photographs captured not just the visible changes in the mother bear's physical condition, but also the subtle evolution of the relationship between mother and cub as they adapted to their changing circumstances. The images told a story of love, concern, adaptation, and mystery that transcended the boundaries between human and animal experience. The emotional impact of what he was witnessing began to affect Ethan's own well-being. He found himself losing sleep, not just from worry about the bears, but from the weight of the decision he knew he would eventually have to make. The professional photographer in him wanted to continue observing and documenting until the story reached its natural conclusion, whatever that might be. The human being in him wanted to take action to help creatures who had somehow touched his heart in ways he hadn't expected. On the 7th day of his vigil, as he watched the now familiar ritual play out once again, Ethan noticed something that made his decision for him. After consuming her usual portion of the dark paste, the mother bear didn't immediately move away from the hollow log as she had done every previous day. Instead, she sat down heavily, her breathing labored and her movements unsteady. The cub immediately moved to her side, pressing against her and making soft vocalizations that sounded remarkably like whimpering. For several long minutes, the mother bear remained motionless except for her labored breathing. Her eyes were open and alert, but there was something in her expression that spoke of struggle and determination rather than simple fatigue. The cub continued his gentle ministrations, licking at her face and ears with obvious concern, occasionally stepping back to study her condition before returning to offer what comfort he could. Finally, with what appeared to be tremendous effort, the mother bear rose to her feet and began the process of concealing the tin once again. But her movements were so slow and deliberate that Ethan found himself holding his breath, afraid that she might collapse before completing her task. When she finally finished arranging the concealing debris, she stood swaying slightly for a moment before beginning the slow journey back to their usual territory. That evening, as Ethan sat in his tent reviewing the day's photographs on his camera's LCD screen, he made the decision that would change everything. He could no longer stand by and watch without taking action to understand what was happening to this wild family that had somehow become part of his own story. Tomorrow, while the bears were away from the hollow log, He would investigate the mysterious tin and its contents, hoping to find answers that might help him understand the tragedy he was witnessing, and possibly even prevent its conclusion. The decision brought both relief and anxiety. Relief that he was finally going to take action, rather than simply observing a potential disaster unfold, but anxiety about what he might discover and how his investigation might change the delicate balance of the situation he had been documenting. Whatever secrets that hollow log contained, Ethan knew that uncovering them would mark a turning point, not just in his understanding of the mystery, but in his own relationship with the wild creatures who had captured his heart and challenged his assumptions about the boundaries between observation and intervention. As sleep finally claimed him that night, Ethan's dreams were filled with images of dark forests and mysterious tins, of mother bears carrying burdens too heavy for their cubs to understand, and of the thin line between helping and interfering that he was about to cross in his quest for answers to questions that had consumed his thoughts and touched his heart in ways he was only beginning to understand. The morning air carried a crisp clarity that seemed to sharpen Ethan's resolve as he prepared for what felt like the most important investigation of his life. He had waited until the bear family moved toward their usual foraging grounds on the far side of the valley before making his approach to the hollow log. Every step through the undergrowth felt weighted with significance, as if he were crossing an invisible threshold between observer and participant in a story that had already changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. The hollow log lay exactly as he had seen it through his telephoto lens countless times before, partially concealed beneath a carefully arranged tangle of ferns and moss-covered debris. But approaching it on foot, without the protective distance of his camera equipment, Ethan felt the full weight of what he was about to do. He was violating the most fundamental principle of wildlife photography, abandoning his role as passive observer to become an active participant in the lives of the creatures he had been documenting. His hands trembled slightly as he carefully moved aside the concealing vegetation, revealing the weathered tin that had become the center of so much mystery and concern. The container was older than he had expected, its surface marked by years of exposure to the elements and bearing the faded remnants of what might once have been a commercial label. The metal showed signs of careful handling, with worn spots that suggested it had been opened and closed many times over an extended period. When Ethan finally lifted the lid, the contents were both familiar and surprising. The dark paste he had watched the mother bear consume looked exactly as he had expected, but the smell that rose from the container was nothing like what he had imagined. Instead of the chemical odor he had feared might indicate poison, or the medicinal scent he had hoped might suggest legitimate treatment, the tin released an earthy herbal aroma that spoke of natural ingredients carefully combined and aged. Using a small sample container from his photography kit, Ethan carefully extracted a tiny portion of the paste for later analysis, though he suspected that understanding its true nature would require more than simple chemical testing. The consistency was thick but not sticky, and the dark color seemed to come from a mixture of what looked like ground herbs, possibly combined with tree saps or other natural binding agents. Whatever it was, it had clearly been prepared with considerable knowledge and care. But it was what he discovered beneath the tin that truly changed everything. Wrapped in oiled cloth and carefully protected from moisture was a collection of handwritten papers that bore the unmistakable marks of scientific documentation. The writing was faded but still legible, and as Ethan carefully unfolded the first page, he found himself looking at detailed botanical notes written in a hand he recognized with a shock of surprise and emotion. The papers belonged to his grandfather, Dr. Samuel Marshall, a botanist who had spent the final years of his life studying the medicinal properties of native plants in this very forest. Ethan had known that his grandfather had maintained a research cabin somewhere in the wilderness, but the old man had died when Ethan was still a child, and the location of his final research site had been lost to family memory. Now, surrounded by the towering pines and ancient oaks of this remote valley, Ethan realized he had stumbled upon not just a mystery involving wild bears, but a connection to his own family history that he had never expected to find. The notes revealed a story that was both more complex and more beautiful than anything Ethan had imagined during his days of worried observation. His grandfather had been working on developing natural supplements that could help wild animals overcome nutritional deficiencies and health challenges that were becoming more common as human development encroached on traditional habitats. The dark paste in the tin was not medicine for illness, but a carefully formulated nutritional supplement designed to strengthen the weak and support healthy growth in young animals. According to the detailed documentation, the supplement was particularly effective for animals recovering from injury or illness, or for young creatures who needed additional support to develop properly. The formula combined specific herbs known for their strengthening properties with natural minerals and nutrients that were often lacking in modern wilderness environments. Most importantly, the notes indicated that the supplement was completely safe for consumption by adult animals, though the recommended dosage needed to be carefully controlled to avoid digestive upset. As Ethan read through page after page of meticulous research notes, a new understanding of what he had been witnessing began to take shape. The mother bear's behavior suddenly made perfect sense when viewed through the lens of his grandfather's research rather than his own fearful assumptions. She wasn't poisoning herself or consuming medicine for her own illness. She was testing the supplement's effects on her own body to ensure it was safe before giving it to her cub. The revelation hit Ethan with the force of a physical blow. The mother bear's apparent weakness and fatigue weren't signs of poisoning or illness, but the natural result of consuming a supplement designed for smaller, younger animals. An adult bear taking doses appropriate for a cub would naturally experience some digestive discomfort and temporary lethargy as her system processed the concentrated nutrients. She was deliberately making herself uncomfortable, possibly even sick, to ensure that the supplement would be safe for her young cub. Further reading revealed even more touching details about the mother bear's strategy. His grandfather's notes included observations about how intelligent female bears would sometimes test new food sources on themselves before introducing them to their cubs, a behavior that demonstrated not just maternal protectiveness, but also sophisticated decision-making abilities. The mother bear had somehow discovered the hidden cache of supplements and had instinctively understood their potential value for her cub, but her maternal instincts had demanded that she test them thoroughly before risking her young one's health. The timing of her discovery made perfect sense when Ethan thought back to his earliest observations of the bear family. He had noticed a subtle limp in the cub's gait, so minor that he had initially dismissed it as normal variation in young animal movement. But now he understood that the mother bear's keen senses had detected what his human eyes had missed. Her cub was dealing with some form of developmental challenge that could benefit from nutritional support. The scientific documentation revealed that such challenges were becoming increasingly common in wild populations as environmental pressures and habitat loss created nutritional gaps that hadn't existed in previous generations. Young animals who might once have thrived on traditional diets sometimes needed additional support to reach their full potential, and caring parents who could provide that support were giving their offspring crucial advantages in an increasingly challenging world. As Ethan carefully returned the papers to their protective wrapping and replaced the tin in its hiding place, his understanding of the entire situation underwent a complete transformation. What he had interpreted as a tragic mystery involving potential poisoning was actually a beautiful story of maternal love and sacrifice. The mother bear wasn't dying from consuming a toxic substance. She was enduring temporary discomfort to ensure her cub's long-term health and strength. The implications of this discovery extended far beyond the immediate mystery that had consumed his thoughts for the past week. His grandfather's research represented years of careful study aimed at helping wild animals adapt to changing environmental conditions, and the mother bear's behavior demonstrated the remarkable intelligence and adaptability that allowed wild creatures to take advantage of available resources, even when those resources came from unexpected sources. But perhaps most significantly, Ethan realized that he was witnessing something that bridged the gap between human knowledge and animal wisdom in ways that challenged conventional thinking about the relationship between civilization and wilderness. His grandfather's scientific research had created a tool that could help wild animals, but it was the mother bear's intelligence and maternal instincts that had discovered and learned to use that tool effectively. The walk back to his campsite felt like a journey through a transformed landscape. The same trees and rocks and streams that had surrounded him for the past week looked different now that he understood the true nature of the story unfolding in their midst. Instead of witnessing a tragedy, he had been documenting one of the most beautiful examples of parental love and sacrifice he had ever encountered, made all the more remarkable by the fact that it was playing out in the animal kingdom. That evening, as Ethan sat by his small campfire reviewing his grandfather's notes by lamplight, he felt a profound connection to both his family history and the wild creatures who had become such an important part of his story. The mother bear's willingness to endure discomfort and weakness to protect her cub's future health spoke to universal themes of parental sacrifice that transcended species boundaries. Her behavior demonstrated intelligence, planning, and selflessness that rivaled anything he had ever observed in human parents. The mystery that had tormented him for days had been replaced by a deep appreciation for the complexity and beauty of the natural world. The mother bear's apparent illness had been an act of love, her secretive behavior a demonstration of careful planning, and her gradual weakening a temporary sacrifice that would ultimately benefit her cub's long-term health and development. Understanding this truth transformed Ethan's entire perspective on what he had been witnessing and documenting. As he prepared for sleep that night, Ethan's mind was filled not with worry and confusion, but with anticipation for what he might observe in the coming days. Now that he understood the true nature of the mother bear's behavior, he could watch for signs that her testing phase was coming to an end and that she was preparing to introduce the supplement to her cub. The story he had been documenting was approaching a new chapter, one that promised to be even more touching and remarkable than what had come before. The transformation in Ethan's understanding had been so complete that he felt like a different person from the worried photographer who had first noticed the mother bear's secretive trips to the hollow log. Knowledge had replaced fear. Appreciation had replaced concern, and wonder had replaced confusion. He was no longer watching a potential tragedy unfold, but documenting one of the most beautiful examples of parental love he had ever encountered, made all the more special by its connection to his own family's legacy of caring for the natural world. In the days that followed Ethan's discovery of his grandfather's research, a remarkable transformation began to unfold in the forest clearing where the Bear family made their home. Armed with understanding rather than fear, Ethan was able to observe their behavior with new eyes, seeing patterns and meanings that had been invisible to him when he had been consumed with worry about the mother bear's apparent decline. The change began subtly, as the most profound changes often do. The mother bear's daily visits to the hollow log continued, but Ethan could now see that her consumption of the supplement was becoming more measured and deliberate, as if she were fine-tuning her understanding of its effects on her system. Her periods of weakness and fatigue, which had once filled him with dread, now appeared to be carefully controlled experiments in determining the optimal dosage and timing for introducing the supplement to her cub. Most significantly, Ethan began to notice that the mother bear was starting to include her cub In her trips to the area around the hollow log, though she continued to keep the tin itself hidden from his direct observation, she would lead him to the vicinity and then engage in what appeared to be teaching behaviors, showing him how to identify certain plants and scents that might be related to the supplement's ingredients. It was as if she were preparing him for a revelation that she had been planning all along. The cub's response to these new lessons was heartwarming to observe. His earlier confusion and concern for his mother's welfare had evolved into focused attention and obvious eagerness to learn. He would follow her movements with the intense concentration of a dedicated student, occasionally attempting to mimic her actions or investigate scents that she had shown particular interest in. The bond between mother and child, which had been strained by the mystery of her secretive behavior, was being rebuilt on a foundation of shared learning and mutual trust. On what would prove to be a pivotal morning, Ethan watched as the mother bear approached the hollow log with her cub following closely behind. But instead of sending him away as she had done so many times before, she allowed him to remain nearby as she carefully retrieved the weathered tin. The cub's eyes widened with curiosity as he observed the container that had been the source of so much mysterious activity, but he remained perfectly still, as if sensing the importance of the moment. What happened next was so touching that Ethan found himself fighting back tears as he documented it through his camera lens. The mother bear opened the tin, and, for the first time in all their visits to this location, she did not consume any of the dark paste herself. Instead, she used one massive claw to extract a tiny portion of the supplement and offered it to her cub with the gentle care of a parent giving medicine to a sick child. The young bear approached the offered substance with natural caution, sniffing carefully before tentatively tasting the smallest possible amount. His expression was comical in its concentration as he processed the unfamiliar flavors and textures, but there was also something deeply moving about his obvious trust in his mother's judgment. When no adverse effects occurred after several minutes of careful observation, the mother bear offered him a slightly larger portion, which he accepted with growing confidence. The entire process was conducted with a level of care and attention that spoke to the mother bear's deep understanding of both the supplement's properties and her cub's individual needs. She monitored his reactions constantly, adjusting the amount and timing of each dose based on subtle cues that only a devoted parent would notice. It was clear that all her previous testing and experimentation had been leading to this moment, when she could safely introduce her cub to something that would benefit his health and development. Over the following days, Ethan witnessed a gradual but remarkable transformation in the young bear's physical condition and behavior. The subtle limp that had initially been so minor as to be almost unnoticeable began to disappear entirely, replaced by increasingly confident and coordinated movement. The cub's energy levels, which had already been impressive for such a young animal, seemed to increase even further, and his play became more vigorous and sustained than ever before. But perhaps most significantly, the cub began to display new levels of strength and agility that were remarkable even by the standards of healthy young bears. He could climb higher, run faster, and play longer than before, and his physical development seemed to be accelerating in ways that would give him significant advantages as he continued to grow and learn the skills necessary for independent survival. The mother bear's own condition improved dramatically once she was no longer consuming adult-sized doses of a supplement designed for much smaller animals. Her energy returned, her movements regained their fluid grace, and the magnificent presence that had initially drawn Ethan's attention was restored in full measure. But now there was something additional in her demeanor, a quiet satisfaction that spoke of a job well done and a challenge successfully met. The relationship between mother and cub had also been transformed by their shared experience with the supplement. The cub's earlier confusion and concern had been replaced by obvious admiration and trust, as if he understood on some level that his mother had been working to benefit his welfare, even when her actions had seemed mysterious or troubling. Their play sessions became more elaborate and joyful, their grooming rituals more affectionate, and their overall bond seemed strengthened by the trial they had weathered together. As Ethan continued to document their daily lives, he began to see broader implications of what he had witnessed. The mother bear's behavior represented a remarkable example of how intelligent animals could adapt to changing environmental conditions by taking advantage of available resources, even when those resources came from human sources. Her ability to test, evaluate, and safely implement the use of his grandfather's supplement demonstrated problem-solving skills and forward-thinking that challenged conventional assumptions about animal intelligence and adaptability. The story also highlighted the potential for positive interactions between human knowledge and animal wisdom, showing how scientific research aimed at helping wildlife could be discovered and utilized by the very creatures it was designed to benefit. His grandfather's years of careful study had created a tool that could help wild animals thrive in challenging conditions, but it was the mother bear's intelligence and maternal dedication that had made that tool effective in the real world. More broadly, the experience had taught Ethan important lessons about the dangers of making assumptions based on incomplete information. His initial interpretation of the mother bear's behavior as potentially self-destructive had been based on fear and misunderstanding rather than careful observation and analysis. Only by investigating further and seeking to understand the complete context of what he was witnessing had he been able to appreciate the true beauty and significance of the story unfolding before him. The photographs and documentation he had gathered would tell a story that went far beyond simple wildlife observation. They captured a narrative about love, sacrifice, intelligence, and adaptation that spoke to fundamental truths about parental dedication and the remarkable capabilities of wild creatures. The images of the mother bear's careful testing of the supplement, her gradual introduction of it to her cub, and the subsequent improvement in both their conditions would serve as powerful evidence of the complex emotional and intellectual lives of animals. As his time in the forest drew toward a close, Ethan found himself reflecting on the profound impact this experience had had on his understanding of both wildlife and his own family history. The discovery of his grandfather's research had created an unexpected connection between his professional work and his personal heritage, showing how the dedication to understanding and helping the natural world could span generations and create lasting positive impacts. The mother bear's story had also reinforced his belief in the importance of patient observation and careful documentation in understanding animal behavior. The mystery that had initially seemed so troubling had revealed itself to be a beautiful example of intelligence and love, but only because he had been willing to invest the time and effort necessary to understand its true nature. The experience would influence his approach to wildlife photography for years to come, reminding him to look beyond surface appearances and seek deeper understanding of the complex motivations and relationships that drive animal behavior. On his final morning in the forest, Ethan positioned himself one last time to observe the bear family's daily routine. The mother bear and her cub moved through their territory with a confidence and vitality that spoke of optimal health and strong family bonds. The cub's movements were fluid and powerful, showing no trace of his earlier subtle limp, and his playful energy seemed boundless. The mother bear watched his antics with obvious pride and satisfaction, occasionally joining in his games with the enthusiasm of a parent who knew her child was thriving. As they passed near the hollow log where so much of their story had unfolded, the mother bear paused to check on the hidden tin one final time. But instead of retrieving it for use, she simply ensured that it remained properly concealed. as if acknowledging its importance while recognizing that its primary purpose had been fulfilled. The cub showed mild curiosity about her actions, but no longer seemed puzzled by them, suggesting that he now understood the significance of this location in their shared experience. The image of the two bears moving together through the dappled sunlight of the forest clearing would remain with Ethan for the rest of his life. It represented not just the successful conclusion of a remarkable story of parental love and sacrifice, but also a powerful reminder of the complex relationships that exist between human knowledge and animal wisdom, between scientific research and natural instinct, and between the world of civilization and the realm of the wild. As he packed his equipment and prepared to leave the forest, Ethan carried with him not just photographs and documentation, but a profound appreciation for the intelligence, adaptability, and emotional depth of the creatures who shared the world with humanity. The mother bear's willingness to endure discomfort and weakness to ensure her cub's health and strength had demonstrated parental love in its purest form, while her ability to discover, test, and implement the use of his grandfather's supplement had shown remarkable problem-solving abilities and forward thinking. The story would become one of the most important and meaningful projects of Ethan's career, not just because of its scientific and emotional significance, but because of the personal connections it had revealed between his own family's legacy and the ongoing drama of life in the wilderness. His grandfather's research had found its intended purpose through the intelligence and dedication of a wild mother bear, creating a bridge between human knowledge and animal wisdom that would inspire and inform Ethan's work for years to come. The forest seemed to bid him farewell as he made his way back toward civilization, carrying with him the memory of one of the most beautiful examples of parental love and sacrifice he had ever been privileged to witness. The mother bear's story would touch the hearts of everyone who heard it, serving as a powerful reminder that love, intelligence, and dedication transcend the boundaries between species and connect all living creatures in the fundamental struggle to protect and nurture the next generation.